Hi, I'm Teresa Coates from Crinkle Dreams. I am here today at Missouri Star Quilt Company, and I am excited to share with you a tutorial for the Hexy Bottom Bag, a pattern of mine. So this pattern requires only 2 fat quarters, which is super great. If you want to add a pocket, which is totally optional, you can grab a 3rd fat quarter and be able to make a really coordinating bag. It's really fun. We're going to do that today with some K-Facet fabric, and we have 3 fabrics that we're using to create the bag, the lining, and the pocket. All right, so to get started, the first thing we need to do is take one of our fat quarters that we're going to use for the outer bag, and we're going to put the fusible woven interfacing on the back of that. We're going to iron it on. We're going to iron it on the whole fat quarter just to make it a little bit easier. So instead of cutting out our pieces out of interfacing and fabric, we're going to interface the fabric and then we'll cut out our pieces. So we're just going to put our interfacing on here, and then we're going to follow the manufacturer's directions and press it. Some of the manufacturers will want to use steam, so make sure you read those instructions and press it on very well from both sides. So once we've got the interfacing on here, we're going to go ahead and trace out the template. So I'm just going to use the template that's in the pattern. There are 2 lines really, so there's one line that is the outer bag edge, and then there is another cutting line for the lining fabric. So since this is my outer fabric, I would just go ahead and position this on here and trace around the pocket pattern here. Okay, then we can go ahead and cut those out. Once you've got those done, we've got some ready for us, and we'll go ahead and assemble. So here are my 6 wedges for the outer bag, all interfaced and ready to go. So I've got 5 because I got 1 ready to go here. All right, so I've got my wedges. So now we're going to put the wedges together. First, we want to decide if we want pockets. We're going to put those on now. So for this one, I'm going to actually put 3 pockets on every other wedge. So I need to put a pocket on one of these so we can show how that's done. So the pattern comes with the templates for both the pocket and the pocket lining. So I've got one that's cut for the pocket and one that's cut for the lining. The construction on this is a little bit funky, so I'm going to walk you through that because it makes it a little bit easier to do, but is also a little bit funky. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pocket and pocket lining, we're going to put them right sides together and line up this top edge. So you'll notice that they're not the same size, and that is actually right, okay, because we're going to use that difference in size to create a faux binding. So I'm going to go ahead and across the top here, I'm going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So get this down. I'm just using a 2.5 stitch length, making sure to lock stitch at the beginning and the end. And I'm just going to stitch right across the top here. Okay, so now I'm going to take this to the iron and press it. I'm going to press this so that the pocket is here, and I'm going to press it toward the lining. Press the seam allowance up. Okay, then I just take and fold this. Iron. I'm going to take and fold this back right at the top of that seam allowance and press it to create that little binding look on the edge without actually creating any binding. Okay? All right, so now once we've got that pressed, we've got this little faux binding right up here, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch in the ditch right here. If you'd like to, you could top stitch along the edge as well, but I like to top stitch just in the ditch. So I'm going to do that. Okay, and with this one, I don't need to back stitch, and I am going to make my stitch length a little bit longer to give it that top stitch sort of look. There we go, beautiful. So we're just going to stitch right along that edge. And that kind of gives it a little definition and kind of feeds into that faux binding look. All right, so let me trim that up. Trim off my threads. Now I've got my pocket. So to get this onto the wedge, we want to go ahead and mark it. All right, so I'm going to mark 1/4 inch up from the bottom here. lining it up. And this will be my stitching line. So now I'm going to take my wedge. So this is one of my outside wedges. Doesn't matter which one it is right now. You just need to pick as many wedges as you want to make pockets on. Okay, so I'm just going to pick one and I'm going to put my pocket on here. There are two corners here where it comes straight and then tapers into the center. These two corners are what we want to line up that line we just drew with, because that's going to be where we stitch it. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and stick a couple of pins in here just so I can keep it there. Okay, and I'm going to do a little double check, make sure that my corners are matching well enough. Seems like it. Now I'm going to go and stitch on that line. And I need to make sure and get my stitch length down to the normal 2.5, and I'm going to stitch right across that line. So I'll do a little lock stitch, stitch across, making sure not to sew over my pins. Back stitch and cut my thread. So now I've got my pocket sewn on to the bottom that's going to flip up and create the cute little pocket here. All right, so the way that we do this, because you can tell they don't match, we're going to go ahead and sew one side and then the other. So this creates a little bit of volume in the pocket. So I'm going to pin it along one side. I'm going to sew this. And I'm going to sew it with a scant 1/4 inch. So we're going to come back along and sew it together with a 1/4 inch. But right now I'm going to sew it a little bit smaller because I'm just trying to get it basted in. Okay. Now I've got this side sewn in, so I'm going to make this side match. And you can see that little pop of the pocket happens, which is really fun and creates a pocket that stays open for you. And this can be used for all sorts of things, but I really like the way that that pocket sits. So now I'm going to stitch it again from top to bottom, or bottom to top. Again with a scant 1/4 inch. It's really just a basting stitch. All right, so now I've got a little wedge and I've got 2 other wedges that I want to use to create a side. So we're going to do one side of the bag at a time. So we're going to sew 3 wedges together and 3 wedges together, and then we'll sew those together. So depending on how you want your bag to lay out, you're going to need to sew them together in the right order. I've already got one side done, so actually I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch this out. I forgot I wanted to put 2 pockets over here. So I've got my other one here. So I've got half the bag, so I've got 1, 2, 3 pockets. I'm gonna make this side and then we'll sew them together. Okay, so I've got my wedges here. I'm gonna start with 2 of them, sew them together. I wanna make sure that my pocket gets pushed out of the way so I don't get any weird little puckers in here. So we're just gonna push it to the side and then we'll pin these together. All right, so I'm just gonna pin it at the top to make sure those match. And then pin it down here where the pocket comes together to keep that pushed out of the side. And then I'm going to pin it at the corner, because this corner we're going to want to stop and pivot at. And then I want to make sure that the ends match here. So I'm actually going to pin this so that it kind of comes down a little bit. So I end up not pinning this quite as perpendicular, and it's really just to hold part of this side together, because I have found that this part wants to slip a little. So we're going to sew down here, pivot at the corner, and sew to the bottom. So with this one, we want to do this also with a scant 1/4. All right, and that is because we want to make our outside bag a little bit larger than the inside bag. We'll talk about that more when we get there. I'm going to go ahead and back stitch and then just sew down this side. Now when I get to this corner, this is where the pocket is ending, so I want to make sure that I'm stopping just about where that pocket ends. so that the pocket will sit at the base of the bag. Go ahead and pivot and sew down the rest of that side. Okay. So once it's sewn, it's going to look like this. All right. To make this turn nicely later, we're going to want to go ahead and clip here. So I want to clip kind of a little diamond shape out of here, where I'm taking a little bit out of each side. So when this opens, that fabric will come together and create a fullness here, so that the corners will sit and become a nice corner here when it's opened. If you don't clip out this seam, it ends up being really bulky and won't sit very well. So we want to clip here, and then I want to go ahead and clip here as well. And I'm just going to take a little bit out of this. And that's going to create a little less bulk down at the bottom when all of those wedges come together. We have a lot of seam allowances. Clipping it now will make that easier. So I'm going to go ahead and press this, and I'm going to press my seams open. So I'm going to go ahead and press this open. So I'm going to press this here, and press these seams open right along the bottom first. I'm going to kind of make it stand up. And press right up to that corner. Then I will come on this side, make sure that my pocket is pulled out of the way so I don't press any inadvertent pleats in that. Press this seam open. Give it a little tug, make sure it's nice and flat. And press again right up into that corner. So that's what it ends up looking like. Now we're going to go ahead and sew the other one on there. So I'm going to sew the other wedge onto the pair. So I've got a pair, and then I'm going to sew a third one on. That's what we're going to do with both sides. So I'm going to pin this the same way that I did before, starting at the top and making sure that my pocket is pushed out of the way and pinning in those important places to keep it nice and neat as I sew. Okay, and it is really important to make sure that these corners on both wedges match and that they come together nicely. And again, when I come down to the bottom, I'm going to press those seams open so that when I sew over it, the seams are open. So let's sew that again with a scant 1/4 inch. So again, I'm going to clip those seams, one at the bottom and one at that corner. To make it lay flat. Then we'll press that again. So if I kind of make the bag stand up as I'm going, it's a little bit easier to press this. If you have a ham, this is another great way of being able to press those side edges. This works pretty well. Again, just pressing those open. Making sure that they're nice and flat and that the pocket isn't caught. All right, so now I have 2 wedges. Created one earlier, so I've got my 3 pockets. It's going to go wedge, pocket, wedge, pocket, wedge, pocket. And so now I can sew these together. So we're just going to turn them kind of right sides together. Bend this one out so that the outside is here. Oops. And I'm going to pin that along the corners, the top, the bottom, and sew this. This one gets a little bit trickier just because we're going to sew a U shape. So we're going to kind of work our way around this. So we want to make sure and pin it well. And we want to try to get these seams to match. I didn't clip that one yet. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to try to get these little triangles to match up here at the bottom. So you can use that little quilter's trick where we stick a pin in one side, stick it out the other side of the seam matching. Get those to match up. And then I'll put another pin through here to hold those together where I want them to be. Again, match my corners. And my top edges. So those are the important places to match, is the top edge, the corner, and the very bottom. And the rest of it, we just make it work. Okay. So once I've got those pins in there, I can sew this all the way around with my 1/4 inch seam allowance and create the whole bucket. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch, make sure that that's nice and secure, and then I'm going to work my way around here. It's going to be really easy the first bit, and then it will get a little bit funkier, but not too bad. So as I get to this corner again, I want to pivot right at the base of the pocket. So I'm going to turn. Sew along here and making sure that this is flat underneath here where it's sewing so that nothing puckers, because we've now got kind of a 3D object. We want to take extra care, make sure nothing gets pushed the wrong direction. Okay. So again, when I'm under this base, I'm just going to try to pivot things just a little bit to get it to go forward and straight across that base, and hopefully make a nice seam join down there. Again, sew to the base of the pocket, pivot, and sew up the side. Okay, so now I've got the 2 wedges sewn together and it becomes a bag. All right, we've got these nice, sits up well, but we're going to need to press these 2. So again, we're going to clip the corners, press those seams open. I'm also going to clip a little bit down here at the bottom to try to get rid of some of that bulk, and then I'll turn it inside out. We can see what it looks like. All right. So this gets a little harder because we've got the whole thing that comes around. So I kind of have to press it on top of itself, and we're just not going to press it really hard. Like I said, if you've got a ham or even a sleeve board, I know is more for garment sewing than quilting, but that will work really nicely as well. So just press those open and get it to look as nice as possible. I'm going to give it a press from the other side too, and make sure those seams are flat from that side. I'll turn this inside out. See how it's looking, see what else I need to press. Okay. Give those a little press from the top, from inside the bag. And try Try to make sure that those are nice and flat in there. And that's just easier to get to this way by turning the bag inside out. And because I have pockets on both sides, I can kind of just swing my little travel iron back and forth and get all of those. Okay. All right. All right. So we've got all of this pressed, ready to go. It looks like a bag. Now we need to do the lining. We're going to do the lining in the exact same way, except we're going to sew it with a full 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to leave a 3-inch gap. And I've already got mine ready to go. So I've got mine sewn and pressed. I've got a little turning gap somewhere. Here it is. So a little 3-inch gap is enough to get the bag to come through nicely. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn this. No, I want to leave this one out because this one is the smaller one. This is the bigger one. This is the way I always have to do it in my head, is which one is bigger, which one's going to go inside. So this one I'm going to turn this way. And the lining I'm going to turn so that it's right side out so I can put these right sides together. All right, doesn't matter where my turning gap goes. It's just going to pop in here somewhere, and I'm going to match up my seams. So this is an important part to do, is to match up these seams. If you are not very good at matching up your seams yet, you can absolutely offset them and make them centered between each other. And then nobody knows that you're not very good at it yet. Okay, so I'm going to pin around here at each one of these intersections, or where the seams come together. I'm going to get those lined up and stick a pin in there parallel all the way around. And this inside might have to get pulled just a little bit because it was made with slightly larger seam to give it a nicer fit inside. So on some of those you might have to give it a little bit of a tug to make them match, but it should be just kind of a scant 1/8 of an inch maybe. It's not very big at all, the difference. Okay, so once I've got those pinned all the way around, then I'm going to sew this with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance around the top. And I made sure and have my stitch length back at a 2.5, which is where we want it to be. I'm going to stitch all the way around here. And make sure and open those seams as I go across them. And hopefully they stay open on both sides. All right, and once I come around here to where I started, I'm going to go ahead and just aim for this. So I'm going to aim for the stitching line that I did before, and I'm going to cross it just a little bit, and then I will backstitch to secure that and clip my threads. Now I've got a bag, almost. So we're going to turn it inside out through that little turning hole that we left. This should be absolutely fine the way that it is. We don't have to do any other pressing. We'll turn it inside out and do the rest of it and make it turn into a cute little bag. So I'm just going to work it through that little hole and kind of pull it gently. Make sure you've backstitched your turning gap so that you don't pop any stitches there. And I will say that the outer bag, pull that part out first. It'll be a little stiffer and slightly harder to pull because of the interfacing, so you want to do that first, and it will make it turn inside really nicely. Oh, I have a lovely little point there. That makes me happy. All right, so now I turn this. We see that this is where it's going to start to go. All right, what I want to do is use that basting stitch that we did at the 3/4 inch. I'm going to go ahead and push that up, and I'm going to press right along. So I'm going to press right along that stitching line so that I have a nice even edge to my bag. So we'll take that to the iron and press that down. So I'm just pressing, just kind of finger pressing it along where those stitches are, and then I'm going to press that direction. So I press it kind of into the bag, right along that edge. Now I found that this stitching line works the best for me to get that even. It isn't absolutely necessary, but it does make it a little bit easier. I found that I have a tendency to make the top a little wiggly if I don't add that line in there. So I need to come back and clip some stitches, clip some threads. Okay. All right. So now we've got a little bag. I'm going to push all of my bits out here. All of those corners, we've got 6 corners to push out. We're kind of doing it from inside and outside on both of those. The lining fabric will sit down at the bottom of this, and you just kind of push them all out. Creates a nice little bag. And then we can take out our top stitching or the basting stitch around the top, and we'll sew the turning hole closed, and then we'll finish it up. The key to the basting stitch is really to make it a large stitch too. So a 4.5 or a 5 is critical to that. If you do it at a smaller stitch, you'll be actually having to take stitches out. We don't want to do that. This one, they'll just pop. All right, there's that. A couple other loose threads here. I feel my Eleanor Burns coming on right now, just throwing stuff behind me. Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so now we're going to hand stitch our turning gap closed. So this part, we'll stitch this closed, and then we'll stitch around the top. I tend to stitch around the top, and then I hand close it. Truth is, I'm really bad about doing the hand stitching later. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch it now around the top and show you how it looks when it's finished. So I'm going to pin a couple places just to make sure it stays where I want it to. Then we're going to take it to the machine and stitch inside here right along the top edge. Okay. So I'm going to kind of stitch in the ditch, but I'm also wanting to make sure that it looks nice on the outside. So I'm going to keep it even on the outside and see where it lands on the inside. So I'm going to open up my stitch length just a little bit to a 3.5 so I get a nice top stitch look, and stitch all the way around in a circle. Back stitch over that where I started, clip my threads, and there we go. Now we've got a cute little bag ready to go to fill with all sorts of yarn or toys or scraps. I use mine for my scrap fabrics, and I color code them, so all my red scraps go in one and green scraps go in another one. And they work really well to do that. You can also put your little sewing utensils, all sorts of things in the little pockets. Thanks for joining me to make a Hexy Bottom Bag here at Missouri Star Quilt Company. I hope you enjoy making your own, and we'll see you next time.